My husband and I are not used to sharing finances, and for the past 3 years of our marriage, such a system seems quite convenient to us. We had almost no serious disagreements on this ground, and although sometimes he could hint that I should take over the payment, I always did it only on my own, as, for example, recently when I decided to treat him to a trip to a restaurant. Last week he had a particularly good moment at work. He was awarded a bonus, and he, blinded by joy, immediately shared the news with the whole family. Naturally, the idea arose to celebrate this event together. He chose a restaurant, made a list of dishes and drinks, and his whole family was invited to this holiday. When we were at the table and the moment came to pay, I automatically assumed that, given the occasion, he would want to cover the costs himself. But as soon as the bill appeared, he suddenly asked me to pay it. It was amazing, and I asked why he suddenly decided that I should take over the bill if it was his holiday, his personal success. He said he was sure that since I had offered to celebrate the event, I was going to pay for it myself. On the contrary, I was amazed by his decision, because his relatives were also at dinner, and my plans were not to pay for their meal. He tried to calm me down, saying that I should be happy for him, and not express dissatisfaction. Even after I explained to him how ridiculous his assumptions seemed to me, he added that the bonus, it turns out, has not yet been paid. In desperation, he asked me to pay now, assuring me that later he might reimburse me for the money spent. Instead, I insisted on my own. I paid only for myself, for what I personally ordered, and left the restaurant. The commotion began. His family was clearly discouraged by this turn. They did not expect this, and it caused a wave of hostility and reproaches. Upon returning home, his mother started calling me, reproaching me, and saying bitterly that my behavior had spoiled her son's joy and, allegedly, overshadowed the whole evening. I replayed that scene in the restaurant and my own thoughts in those moments 100 times in my head. As if from the sidelines, I watched myself become part of a farce. Is it really acceptable to invite someone to a gala dinner in honor of my success, and then expose them to those who have to pay the bill? Everything that should have been filled with joy and warmth suddenly turned into an unpleasant realization that I found myself in the role of a hostage to circumstances that were not invented by me. Or was it a trap prepared with calculation? In all his words, the husband repeatedly mentioned that he wanted to celebrate with us the award. This word implied generosity, willingness to share his luck. He knew that I would take this as a hint of his intention to take the costs on himself. So why, when it came time to pay, did he, without a shadow of a doubt, shift the burden onto my shoulders? At first, he tried to justify it with a natural expectation, as if I myself would want to thank him in this way. And after that, when I expressed indignation, he did not hesitate to put pressure on guilt, gave arguments about support and allegedly about my inability to be happy for him. At such moments, the thought involuntarily creeps in that there are minor misunderstandings on the surface, but perhaps deep problems are at the heart of them. Questions that, if I'd been more careful, I should have asked before marriage, before we tied our lives together. Marriage is not just a union of two people, but also a union of their ideas, values, and expectations. Is it normal that my husband shows such strange manipulations, adjusts the situation in which it is convenient for him to use my resources? After all, I know that he was used to doing this. It was not an isolated case. Maybe this is a form of financial abuse, no matter how difficult it is to admit it. In fact, if one of us were in his place, would undoubtedly pay for dinner with family and friends, being sincerely glad to share the success. A bonus is a rare moment when we can express gratitude to our loved ones who supported us on the way to this success. But instead of sincerity, I felt only cunning concealment and even gloating from his mother, who seemed to miss no opportunity to humiliate me for my disagreement to pay the bill. Now it has become even clearer to me, perhaps we really should talk to a consultant, as the situation is escalating. Each time we move further away from mutual respect and understanding. After all, what started with an awkward dinner has already turned into a hard test, and the feelings I feel now are not exactly what I imagined when I got married. I stood on the edge between anger and bitterness, seeing how every conversation with my mother around the wedding turned into a series of demands, manipulations, and reproaches. She, with her usual drama, announced that she was not going to appear at the wedding if Nicole was there, and the groom and I considered it a bluff, as had happened many times before. But instead of trying to talk, to find a compromise, she put forward all new conditions. Nicole should not be in the photos, should not participate in the wedding rehearsal, should not be present in the hall during the mother and son dance. It seemed that she was trying to exclude Nicole from the holiday, which became a significant event for everyone. I couldn't figure out what was driving my mother. I tried to remind her that the divorce was hard for all of us, that it was no less painful for Dad than it was for her. But my words seemed to fly into the void. She accused him of everything she could, turning me into a target for accusations. With each new demand, I felt the gap between us growing, and I could no longer turn a blind eye to it. In response to my attempts to find a compromise, she took another awkward step. She announced that she was going to come with a new companion, a man she had met only a month ago. These actions of hers, this desire to condemn, to spoil the joy, seemed to me the collapse of hopes that she could support me at this important moment. I felt that instead of the warm union with my mother, which I had always aspired to, there was only an echo of unresolved conflicts, a pain that came to life again, barely touching the holiday, when she saw that her father was happy with Nicole. Her resentments and selfishness dragged on from the past and turned an important day for us into a nightmare. My fiancé, Sam, understood the dynamics and tried to treat the situation with empathy, but with each new outbreak of drama it became more difficult for him to remain patient. He supported me, but looked at the situation as a person from the outside, considering what was happening inappropriate. My mother's family, for their part, considered me cruel, seeing only that my mother was suffering, and not wanting to understand that there was a long trail of unresolved problems behind it. It seemed that every angle of the situation was covered with ripples of misunderstanding, other people's opinions and rejection. Everything would be much easier if I could talk to my mother frankly, and she would see in my actions not resentment or revenge, but a desire to just be honest and sincere. But my words remained empty in this noisy chorus of expectations, reproaches and dramatic hints. From the very beginning, there was more than just a superficial misunderstanding between Ashley and me. It was a slight but invariably tangible barrier, as if she was not visiting, but checking on me to some extent. She had a special way of communicating, a little skeptical, emphatically friendly, but in every word, in every gesture, whether it was a glance or a fleeting sigh, there was a slight disdain. She showed up at our house as if visiting her younger sister was her personal responsibility, and made no secret that she didn't think I was worthy enough to be a part of this new Rachel's life. Ashley, with her external success and a long-term marriage behind her back, seemed to broadcast to everyone around her, and especially to me, that her experience and judgments were indisputable, that her opinion carried some kind of indisputable significance. Although I tried to show respect, I felt more and more that I was being subjected to an unspoken assessment. At first I thought it was just my imagination or feigned jealousy, but gradually my guesses were confirmed. Ashley didn't miss a single opportunity to throw out the phrase that family relationships are difficult or that some people just don't understand what it means to be a real support for another person. She spoke as if she had the exclusive right to talk about the strength of bonds and the eternity of attachments. When Rachel and I started dating, Ashley was married, and this marriage of hers seemed to be something unshakable, as if the very idea that it could crack was humiliating for her. She made it clear from the very beginning that she kept her personal life under strict control, and at first glance their relationship really looked stable. Her husband was always reserved, almost silent in her presence, as if taking on the role of a silent companion. Ashley, on the other hand, seemed to me to be a woman who is confident in herself and is able to stand up for her truth, even if it costs her considerable effort. However, a few months later, their family suddenly broke up. She never voiced the reasons, but her stories about how the world is unfair and how many underestimate a real woman suggested that this divorce was a painful blow for her. But instead of dealing with it in her own way, Ashley seemed to transfer her resentment to others. Visits to us became for her not just a chance to see Rachel, but also an opportunity to express her ideas about the right relationship, with a subtle hint that I was far from her ideas about a decent man. I had to restrain my irritation. Rachel was full of admiration for her sister and saw her as a caring, devoted person who had been through a lot and was ready to share wisdom. But behind it was Ashley's need for some kind of tacit approval of her decisions, her right to judge. Sometimes she looked at me as if she felt it her duty to evaluate and even correct how I felt about her younger sister, not realizing that her interventions often seemed offensive to me. From the day I learned about Ashley's departure from her husband, it became difficult for me to perceive her in any other way than through the prism of her actions. At that time, I felt a growing disappointment in the person with whom I once found a common language. Her ex-husband, one of the few men my age at family gatherings, commanded my sincere respect. He was a restrained, reasonable man, and, most importantly, clearly attached to Ashley. Their marriage seemed, though not cloudless, but full of mutual respect, and this appearance of stability gave rise to the idea of reliability. And so the news of her leaving him, suddenly, without explanation, with divorce papers left right on the bed, where he may have once sincerely believed in their future together, literally shocked me. Ashley went to another man, a much older man with a successful business, 2 children and a complicated personal history that included an unfinished divorce. She didn't even try to talk to her ex-husband, didn't try to explain herself. It was natural for her to step out of one life and plunge headlong into another, leaving disappointment and pain on the shoulders of those she left behind. As a person whom her now ex-husband considered a friend, I had to come and make sure that everything was all right with him, that his sense of dignity and faith in people might not be destroyed to the ground. It was, in fact, indifference, turning into coldness. The whole situation has shown so vividly that for Ashley, a stable relationship is just a stage on which she plays a role until something more exciting appears on the horizon. A new chapter with her new chosen one began for her instantly, and after only a few days she had already managed to move into his house, leaving behind the remnants of her former life as unnecessary trash. And, unfortunately, her departure had an impact on everyone around her. Her new partner still left his wife and children for her, and a series of family dramas followed. Rachel, my girlfriend, was furious when she found out about her sister's sudden and, as it seemed to her, treacherous act. Their relationship dragged on in heavy silence for a long year. For her, a person with a high sense of affection and loyalty, Ashley's whole act seemed unthinkable. But time heals a lot, and gradually, though not completely forgetting, she began to communicate with her sister again, albeit cautiously, leaving an unspoken distance between them. There is still a glint of bitterness in her eyes, but at the same time a desire not to lose family ties. And so, yesterday, when I returned home, I found Ashley on the couch in hysterics, next to Rachel, who seemed to be trying to calm her down. Everything was clear to me right away, even before Rachel told me what had happened. Another act of drama was playing out in front of my eyes, but now Ashley herself was in the role of the victim. Her husband sent her a message in which he confessed that he had met someone else, whom he now wants to be with. He offered her the rent of a paid apartment for a year, laid out all her things and informed her that they were breaking up. Then, barely able to resist a sarcastic grin, I said what I thought was obvious. Well, at least now the children won't hate you anymore. I went into the bedroom, leaving her crying on the couch, and changed my clothes, getting ready for a normal evening. Returning to cook dinner, I suddenly noticed that Ashley was looking at me. Her gaze was burning, full of reproach, as if I was obliged to show at least a grain of sympathy. She asked if that was really all I was going to say. I answered in the affirmative and continued cooking, not paying attention to her disappointed look. But my words, my indifferent actions, as it seemed to her, only aggravated her condition. And finally, unable to stand it, I said bluntly, "Ashley, this is what you chose. This is called karma. You got what you deserved." At such moments, I always try to remind myself that I love my partner more than I hate his relatives, and that calmness and politeness are my most reliable allies. It's like a game in which you need to be able not to succumb to provocations, no matter how hard they try to hook on to the sick, and as soon as the moment comes when they switch their attention to someone else, you can calmly exhale and continue your evening with a sense of relief. Tonight I set the table for my mother-in-law, as well as for my partner and me and our 2 children. I served the dishes that I cooked, putting my soul into them, did not even immediately sit down at the table, because the children still needed my attention. I had to pour them drinks, make sure everything was in place, and then sit down and have a little snack. I had just eaten a third of my dinner when my eldest son started having a fit of moods, and I had to take him away from the table to give him a chance to calm down. My partner and his mother continued to have dinner quietly, and I coped with the situation as best I could, going away to have a little conversation with my son, after which I returned, assuring them that I would return to my dinner very soon. When my son complained of fatigue, I had to leave dinner again and take him to the bathroom, help him take a shower and change into his pajamas. When I was done, I returned, already anticipating that I would be able to finish my dinner, but I did not find it in place. Going up to my husband, I asked where my food was. As if nothing had happened, he replied that he had moved it to the kitchen, and when I went there, I realized with horror that the plate I had been working on was in the trash. It was filled with scraps and crumbs that covered my food. At that moment, it became difficult for me to contain my irritation. I felt my indignation grow. Excited, I told my partner that I had warned him in advance of my intention to return to my dinner and finish it, that he had no right to throw away what I had prepared, moreover, without warning. However, he only replied that my mother-in-law was sure that I would not return to food, so I just threw it in the trash, and he decided that this was the best way out. Later, when my mother-in-law was leaving, he accompanied her to the car and, as I could tell from the expression on his face, had a lively conversation with her, which clearly mentioned my actions at the table. It seemed to burn me, the discussion of my irritation, which was completely natural in such a situation, as if I was initially not in my right. They looked at me in surprise, not understanding how one could be so upset about a discarded dinner, attributing absurdity and even some intemperance to my act. And now both my partner and my mother-in-law are against me, as if I made a scene and exposed myself in an unfavorable light, not being able to gratefully accept the help that was allegedly given to me. But as I think back over the whole evening, I keep coming back to the same thing. None of them even tried to really help.